I think the idea that you simply shift people to a different location and those trade-offs fundamentally change, I just don't think is right.
As part of his drive for devolution and to move power out of Whitehall, Andy Burnham has said that Number 10 North will take over responsibility for economic growth from the Treasury. Speaking to The Times, the Prime Minister voices his concerns about the dual role the Treasury has currently in promoting economic growth at the same time as controlling the public finances. The Chancellor is reported to be fully supportive of relinquishing some of his power to Manchester, which is somewhat different from what happened when Jim Callaghan tried to do this, and there was much more battles inside Whitehall. But even so, not everyone agrees with this approach, and Sir David Gauke, the former Conservative Chief Secretary to the Treasury, certainly thinks it would be a mistake. So let's find out why. Welcome, David.
Good afternoon, Danny.
Good afternoon. So why are you not a fan of Andy Burnham's plans?
So I think a few points here. First of all, I don't accept that the Treasury is the great barrier to growth. Yes, there are times that the Treasury will say no to particular spending projects that some people will say is going to be great for growth. But the Treasury does have to do that because it has to keep control of public finances. But it is the Treasury that very often is pushing economic growth reforms. Indeed, that should be its role, or one of its roles. So, for example, in my time, it was keen on pushing planning reform, for example. And the reason why that didn't happen wasn't because of the Treasury, but because of political opposition elsewhere. And then there's this argument that, well, the Treasury does too much, it's too powerful. That the Treasury is always going to be powerful. It has got this role as the finance ministry, controlling spending, raising taxes. And it's also got this role as the economic ministry, pushing growth. But look, I think if you take the economic aspect out of the Treasury, what you end up with is a lack of focus on the finance ministry sides of things, on growth. I think we need to make the Treasury more focused on growth, not less. And so I think all of that is a problem. And then my final point is that I am just sceptical. I know that this is quite a fashionable view that we should hive off central government activities to the regions. I'm just sceptical that that is the right way to make this work. Government works by and large on a face-to-face basis. Most ministers have to be in London because we have a parliamentary system. They have to be near to Parliament. The Prime Minister will spend the vast majority of his time in 10 Downing Street. The idea that you can move all of this to a new office that has to recruit afresh, has to find people who are prepared to relocate to Manchester from London, to do all of that at once, and then say, right, you've got responsibility for growth when the rest of government, most of the rest of government is going to be back in London, I think makes the job harder than it needs to be. So for all of those reasons, I think it's a mistake.
Okay, well, you can maybe help me out here. I read all these stories like you did, and at the end of it, I was left wondering, what does it actually mean? I mean, what does it mean to take growth policy out of the Treasury when, for instance, the Treasury is still going to decide tax policy, and tax policy is closely related to growth. The Treasury is still going to have a relationship with Number 10 North or the Department of Industry on any industrial policies, strategic industrial policies. It's inevitable when you are the finance minister, that ministry, that you will have some control over growth. So what does this policy actually mean? What will actually happen that people will be able to tell the difference between what's happening now and this new policy?
Well, it's a very good question, and we await the full details. So both you and I, Danny, I think are reading quite a lot into that Times interview with Patrick Maguire. But what was implicit, I think, in Andy Burnham's comments was that some of the growth functions, you're absolutely right, tax and spend issues stay with the Treasury, but some of the sort of push for growth is put into a separate organisation.
Like what? I mean, what sort of things does the Treasury do that could be done by someone else and isn't related directly to its current Treasury functions?
So I think some of the things, for example, coordinating infrastructure projects, of course, there's still a spending side to that. There's still going to be the Treasury who's saying, well, is this good value for money? But what I would assume is that Andy Burnham is thinking about how do we devolve or how do we move decisions about where infrastructure goes, which roads are built, which rail lines and so on.
And isn't there a point then to saying, first of all, that it's not a bad thing if those are taken by people who are not entirely in London, because Andy Burnham believes that there's been a bias to London. I mean, there's a whole other subject, obviously, for us to discuss whether it's a good idea to double up on the areas that are becoming more productive already, or to try and make new areas more productive. So there's a philosophical question. We won't get into that. Doesn't it make sense if you've got the idea that you want to build outside London to get some people who don't live in London to look over where these projects should be, just using that one example that you gave?
So on that, I think the stronger argument would be to say, let's properly devolve some powers to particular regions. So I'm not making a point, to be clear, that is against devolution. So if there are things that are done in Greater Manchester, let more of those decisions be made by the Greater Manchester Mayor. But I think if let's take the example of transport infrastructure, I still think the disruption of moving people out of London, and also the challenge that you can't get away from some of the fundamentals here. And it does come to this issue that you touched upon about looking at a business case. What are the costs? What are the benefits of a particular project? And you can move the people from London to Manchester, but you're still dealing with the same trade-offs. I don't think it fundamentally shifts that. I'm supportive of an ambitious project that brings the northern cities together. When I was in the Treasury, for a lot of my time in the Treasury, George Osborne was pushing the Northern Powerhouse project that was designed to do exactly that. But I think the idea that you simply shift people to a different location and those trade-offs fundamentally change, I just don't think is right.
Well, that was Sir David Gauke. Thank you very much indeed, the former Conservative Chief Secretary to the Treasury.
We are now joined, as we are every Monday, by Times columnist and economist Paul Johnson. Hello, Paul.
Good morning.
Good morning, Paul. Good to have you with us. So, look, the summer is coming to an end. Attention is turning towards Andy Burnham and John Healey's first budget this autumn. We know they would like to announce some popular cost of living measures, but the latest figures from the Office of National Statistics show that government borrowing in July was higher than expected. Paul, we seem to spend our entire lives waiting for budgets, and then they happen, and we're immediately waiting for the next one. Nonetheless, we know that Andy Burnham his big bet on growth is devolution, and he wants to move some of the decision making from the Treasury to Manchester, allowing mayors to overrule planning decisions and so on. Would this be a step change from what went before?
Not in the short run in terms of growth, no. I mean, look, it is possible, and I would be in favour of actually that more devolution to mayoral authorities will make a bit of a difference to growth over the next decade. It's not going to make any difference over the next year or two, or indeed probably not going to be scored, and this is what really matters for the Chancellor's decisions, highly unlikely to be scored by the Office of Budget Responsibility as something that is going to make a difference in the next 3 or 4 years, and therefore make a difference to the fiscal rules. So a good thing to do, but not something, I think, which is going to give the Chancellor any more room for manoeuvre in the budget this year.
So that you've often reminded us on a Monday morning, as you seek to cheer listeners up, that Rachel Reeves's last budget front-loaded all the good stuff, all the spending, and pushed the spending cuts to the final years of Parliament. Does that mean that Andy Burnham's job is basically going to be to oversee the miserable bits?
That is how it is set up at the moment. So we saw some really big increases in spending last year and this. I mean, it's not obvious that it's people are seeing that in terms of fantastically improved public services. And one of the things that happened has actually been quite a spurt in public sector pay, which has taken up some of that money. So big increases in spending over the first 2 or 3 years of this Parliament. And then what is penciled in is a really tight couple of years at the end. So tight, in fact, that if the NHS and Defence get what we expect they'll get, then other departments might actually get cuts. But it's I'm afraid it's even worse than that, because there are also tax rises, not just penciled in, but putting with unerasable ink for the last couple of years of the Parliament as well, not least the continued freezes to income tax thresholds and allowances, but also some increases in other bits of savings and dividends taxation. There's the new electric vehicle tax and a few other things as well. So yes, there's the last couple of years are going to look rather tough, which, without straying too far from topic, may be one of the reasons that there is at least a little bit of speculation about an early election.
Yeah, sure. Look, there may be some better news being offered by the Resolution Foundation think tank, which has a report out today saying that Britain had a productivity boom in the last 2 years, but we just didn't notice because of the way productivity is measured by the ONS. What can you tell us about this productivity boom?
Yeah, well, I think a boom is putting it a little
small
strongly,
boom.
but I mean, what they're saying, and this is repeating some work by John Van Reenen and others at the London School of Economics, is that if you use the Office of National Statistics numbers on productivity, it looks like we've had a continuation of the last two dreadful decades. But when you're measuring productivity, you're looking at essentially the relationship between the output of the economy and the number of hours worked. And the ONS bases that on this survey called the Labour Force Survey. So that's how they measure number of people in work and hence number of hours worked. And that survey is, to put it mildly, pretty dodgy. They're finding it really hard to get people to respond to it. So what the London School of Economics and the Resolution Foundation have done is use not that survey data, but actual data on tax revenue. So if you look at the HMRC has information, obviously, on all of the tax that all of us pay, and that tells you how many people are in work and paying tax. It also tells you how many people are self-employed and paying tax. Now, if you use that data rather than the Labour Force survey data, it looks like productivity actually improved a bit. Not spectacularly, but better than it has over the last 15 or 20 years in the last couple of years, which would be good news for living standards going forward. Although there is an obverse of that, which is that since they're taking the output of the economy as given, that would imply that there are fewer people in work than the Office of National Statistics thinks.
I mean, presumably when my productivity improves, even as an individual, that means I'm working harder for less money. So it doesn't sound like necessarily related to my sort of standard of living.
And well, no, productivity isn't. You can increase your productivity not by working harder, just by working smarter. I mean, you might be able to do more because you're using AI. It might be that your company has bought you better equipment. It might be that the new ways of doing your work have come about, and that's how productivity increases over time. We're not working harder than we did 50 or 100 years ago. In fact, we're working a lot less. I mean, the average working week is much lower than it was in the past, and we're producing a lot more, and we're being able to do that because there are new ideas, new inventions, new equipment, better infrastructure, better education, all of those things. So yes, you can have it both ways. You can be more productive and actually be working less.
Should the ONS measure productivity in this way then all the time, and should ministers be encouraged, be excited by these good figures, or would that be overselling it somewhat?
Well, I think there's, I think encouraged rather than excited, perhaps. But I think there's a really interesting and rather nerdy statistical question about what the best way of measuring this is. I mean, the downside of the HMRC, the tax data, is it doesn't actually tell you how many hours are being worked. It just tells you how many people are in work and how much is being earned. Whereas the Office of National Statistics is trying to get a sense as well, actually, of how many hours are being worked. But there's certainly a job to be done to try and work out why these two sets of statistics are giving you different numbers. I think probably on the balance of probabilities, this new work, using the HMRC data, is probably giving us a better view of what's happening in the economy. But I wouldn't bet my mortgage on it.
Well, let's check in on the patented Paul Johnson optimism meter before we let you go. Yeah, it's through the roof. Just mild flickers of optimism from Paul Johnson about a potential for a tiny, tiny boom in productivity. It's never seen the like. It's shooting up and up. It may be broken. The electric wave has burst out the metal casing at the top. We're going to have to get a new one. Paul Johnson, thank you very much indeed.